Mr. Pond Boss, tell me what to do to make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Hello everybody, Bob Lusk, the Pond Boss, coming at you live from Running River Ranch in the RV, hanging out at son Jonathan and daughter-in-law Kat's and their three little ones' place for a few days. It's where I can spend time with the grandkids and write some. Hey, thanks for joining me tonight. I don't know where you are or what you're doing. Let me know. I see Dustin Brown checking in. I don't know what your weather's doing. Our weather here is getting ready to deteriorate. Matter of fact, we fled from Granbury today to come down here near Brenham. We're hanging out near Brenham. See Kathy Black, Brian Lee Baker. Good to see you folks checking in. Good to see you. Anyway, we came down to Brenham. We're going to hang out here for a few days. And, you know, got a winter weather warning, big storm coming, ice and snow and all that kind of stuff. And it wouldn't surprise me if a bunch of you guys are already involved in that. Let's see, Jeremy Duckworth, DeAndre Kimbrough. Howdy, y'all. I don't have a great number of topics tonight, so I'm going to count on you folks to chime in and pitch some things out there. Look at there. There's Sean Peters and Todd Austin. Hey, Kenny, checking in from Kansas. You're probably snowed in tonight, man. I don't know how you're feeding your fish tonight. Good to see you, buddy. I had a really interesting thing happen yesterday. I'm helping a family design about a 20-acre, 25-acre, 12-acre, 15. I don't know how big it's going to be. They don't know yet. Trey Carpenter, stupid winter. You weren't kayak fishing today, buddy. But you know what? If you were yesterday, you were catching fish. I see that. John Funk's checking in from mid-Michigan. 47 yesterday, -2 tonight. Lots of snow. I hear it. Doug Cusick, 7 inches of snow, East Wichita. Good evening. Troy Todd, Travis Smith, howdy. Troy Rhodes got an inch of ice projected there, yeah. Yeah, you know, and it's really funny because folks in the north make fun of folks in the south because, I mean, you guys in the north know how to handle snow. We don't, but we don't typically get snow. We don't have snow plows. We get ice. You know, and it's like a skating rink with people that don't have skates on, don't know how to wear them anyway. Look at there, Chris Arthur, date night with his bride. We got to hang out last week. You guys know the drill. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments section. Click like, or even better yet, the little heart thing on there. Share to your timeline. You're eligible for a drawing for a Pond Boss hat and a t-shirt. T-shirt, hey, Pond Boss, you guys know the deal. I'm glad you're tuning in tonight. So, John Funk got his magazine Saturday. That's aggravating to me. You know, we mailed it December 23rd, and you get it in February. Or actually, I guess the end of January. So what in the heck is that? I don't know how that works. Dustin Brown. Got to meet Dustin last week over in South Louisiana. Check out Pristine Ponds. He's going to be an advertiser in the magazine in the resource guide. He's bought a really cool boat that can do everything from dredge to cut weeds to dig up cattails. Pretty cool stuff. Brian Lee Baker, any way to get rid of river otters? We had 3 in our pond this morning. Man, you know, I'm going to tell you, I'll cover that. Really, the best ways to trap them, and if you don't know their habits and you don't know how to trap them, you need to find somebody that does. You know, I'm not an enemy of river otters, but what I am an enemy of is somebody building the perfect fishing lake, pushing it, you know, beyond what the normal bounds of nature might be, then having to yield to the predators that are associated with that bounty that you guys create, that's kind of the aggravating thing to me. I mean, I get it, and I'm going to explain it a little bit more here in just a minute as I talk about what we did. Sean Peters got 13 inches of snow in mid-Illinois. There's Drew Schmidt. I'm glad I made it back too, Wyatt. Yeah, I stayed in front of that front the whole time while I was driving. Here's Michael Gray. Justin Lugwood saw inexperienced snow drivers. I don't know if y'all can hear that noise around me, but I'm in the RV and it's raining like crazy here. It's a lot of rain coming down hard and heavy, and it's we're out. Just that front's just now passing. And when I crawled in the RV a while ago, it was 68 degrees here, and about 50 miles from here, it's 38 degrees. So there's a 30-degree difference, and that front is just now passing through here. So John Funk's catching some bluegill through the ice. Okay, so I do want you to ask questions. I'll hit the otter question a little bit harder here in a minute, but I was sitting on I was in a side-by-side where a guy's building a lake near Childress, Texas, and he doesn't know how big it's going to be. It might be 20 acres, it might be 12. I don't know. He's not really decided that, but he's got the maximum water line laid out, and he's got it in a it's going to be built in kind of an arroyo or kind of like a canyon, and he's got sheer drops on both sides of this canyon. He'll have a little bit of shallow water, but not a huge amount of shallow water. And that eroded canyon is sitting in around dispersible soils, so when it rains, that dirt moves. So the bottom of this creek that's down in the basin of this big, deep canyon, which when I say deep canyon, I'm talking about a washed-out creek bed that's probably 25 feet deep at its deepest point. So we're having a conversation. The earth mover's there. And the earth mover's doing a great job. He's cored the dam down about 10 feet. He's got a good solid foundation to build the dam, and now he's going up. And he's got two kinds of clay, some really tacky white or kind of a yellow-gray clay that is really pure, and he's processing that clay and mixing it with some other dirt that doesn't have quite as much clay, but still pretty good dirt. So he's processing that, and he's bringing it in 6-inch lifts, having the scraper drops it off, the bulldozer flattens it out, then the scraper runs back and forth across it to pack it. And that scraper probably weighs 40,000 pounds, so it's plenty heavy enough to compact that dirt. Now he's going up with the dam. But what the earth mover had never done is talk about, what it's like to build a fishing lake. He's never been through that. Maximilian, good to see you. Hey, there's Howard Dittrich checking in. Howard, it's pretty cold over here in Texas. I don't know what's going on over there with you guys. Dustin Crawley, a lot of rain in Chattanooga. Michael Eric, good to see Michael from Iowa. So anyway, as we're sitting there talking about it, the landowner starts asking me about stocking rates. How many fish are we going to put in it? He says, I'm going to spend a whole lot of money on the earth moving work, and I kind of want to cut back a little bit on the fish. So I said, well, you know what, you can make that choice, but if you stock fewer fish, what you're really buying is time. So I wanted to go back through his goals. So I said, tell me the mission. He said, well, I really want to grow some trophy bass. He said, so I'm thinking I need to stock those at 50 per acre, because if I stock a lower number, they're going to grow a lot faster and get a lot bigger. So I said, okay, we can sure talk about that. David Kemp's there. Water's 55 degrees in North Florida. It was 53 degrees in South Louisiana the other day. That makes total sense to me. Your bass ought to be, Howard, your bass ought to be getting primed and ready to start spawning there in outside Lake City, Florida. So I got a feeling you're going to be some spawning bass on beds here in another 3 or 4 weeks where you are. Looking at those bass near Lake Charles, Louisiana the other day, man. Those things were primed, ready to pop. Got to hang out with Chris Arthur and Christopher Aguilar and my good running buddy now, Ron Ardoin. Ardoin. There we go. I got it right. I suck at that, and I take great pride in understanding people's names and paying attention to that, but I just don't know why I struggle with that one. So anyway, as we're talking, I said, okay, let's talk about let's talk about this. And he said, because I want to get 5 or 6 years down the road, I want to be able to go out and catch a bunch of 4-pound bass and 5-pound bass, and with a legitimate chance of catching an 8 or a 10-pound bass. I said, okay, let's kind of work our way through that. So I said, job number 1 is you got to have happy water. If you don't have happy water, that's the medium they live in. If you don't have good water, nothing else makes any difference. So as the lake begins to fill, we're going to analyze your water chemistry and just see what you've got, what's dissolved in that water, what you have in it. And if we need to amend it, we will, which I doubt it over there, because those soils are heavily mineral and metal laden. So it's going to have a lot of minerals in that water, so we probably won't need to amend it. And what we will need to do is pay attention to how we need to move it, because they have really, really hot summers over there. And he can end up having water temperatures at the surface in triple digits. So managing the water, and he's got some water over 30 feet deep, I got a feeling. by the time they get through excavating around the dam site, he's going to have some pretty deep water. So we're going to have some conferences on how to deal with the water. The second thing that, and then I'm going to give you the 5 fundamentals. I've done this before. I'm going to do it again because it's really important. And they have to be in this order. If they're not in this order, the ones after them don't make any difference. Happy waters, number 1. Habitat. As goes the habitat, so goes what lives in it. If you don't have the best habitat for the bait fish that you want, but not only that, the different sizes, the different years, the different ages of those bait fish, if you don't have the right habitat so those fish can reproduce, hide, and grow up some, places that they can feed, where they can congregate and loaf, then if any of those things are missing, then you don't have the best habitat. And here's where it gets a little complicated for folks. You got to have the right kind of habitat for all the species of fish that you want to include. So he asked me the question, which is better, golden shiners or gizzard shad? And how does that compare to threadfin shad? So I said, we're going to school. I'm going to start asking you some questions. And this guy's really sharp. I mean, he knows, he's been a Pond Boss subscriber for a long time. He's a student. He's had several other lakes. He's very intelligent about it. So I said, tell me about the lifestyle of a gizzard shad. He said, well, they live in the water column and they get their food from the water. I said, tell me about golden shiners. He said, well, they'll bite a hook, so I guess they're kind of predatory, and they lay their eggs along the edges in grass. And he says they seem to survive pretty well. I said, okay, threadfin shad. He said, well, they don't get as big as a gizzard shad, and they die in the winter. And every bit of that's correct. Everybody, except as gizzard shad get bigger, I looked at him and said, you know why they call a gizzard shad a gizzard shad? He said, why? I said, because they have a gizzard. Well, yes, they are filter feeders when they're small, but once they start to get to be about 6, 7, 8 inches long, they go up into shallow water and they filter through the mud and they eat. And they have a very, very long digestive system, so they can ingest muck, silt, fish poop, crustaceans, snails, worms, whatever's in the mud, they're going to ingest it. Whatever they can digest, they will. Their gizzard crushes it. So if they eat a snail, they're kind of like a red ear. They can crush it, but they crush it with a gizzard. You know, I said that and when they spawn, they might have a full-grown gizzard shad may lay 250,000 eggs and wishes them luck. Where a golden shiner spawns a lot fewer eggs per unit of body weight, they stick them on the grass where they can stay out of the muck and stand a better chance to hatch. And then they run in schools of similar sized fish. Both of those do. But gizzard shad can get to be 2 pounds. Golden shiners can be 6 inches, maybe 7 inches long, typically. Threadfin shad, on the other hand, they get to be 5 or 6, maybe 7 inches long. Their average lifespan is 18 months, and they're filter feeders. So even though all 3 of those fish are important prey fish for the predator fish, they live totally different lifestyles. And if you don't have the habitat and the right volumes for those fish, they're not going to thrive. And if they don't thrive, then they're not going to produce anything of any substance. That's why when somebody asks me, what do you think about warmouth sunfish or goggle eye? I don't care. If they show up in a pond, they're really irrelevant. They're kind of a nice little treat to catch one from time to time. You know, a big one as big as your hand, but a pond environment is not the most conducive place for them to thrive, so they're going to be an insignificant contributor to that environment, to that pond situation. So I said, now, do you know, with gizzard shad, people that have gizzard shad, when I'm involved with them, I want them to have gizzard shad once I know that enough of the bass are big enough that they can eat an 8 or 9 inch gizzard shad. So that means I want 25% of that bass population to be at least 3.5 pounds. And if they're not that big, then they can't control the gizzard shad numbers. Then you have a different problem. Where the threadfin shad, they're going to die at 42 degrees. So they're in Childress, Texas. They may die every other winter, may live 3 winters and then die 3 winters. So you never know, because at 42 degrees they die. But threadfin shad tend to stay in the open water, in the water column, filtering their feed out of the water. So if you've got crystal clear water, no plankton bloom, you don't have the food chain to support them. You know, so the other thing with threadfin shad, for example, they're a significant source of food for bass that are 10 to 14 inches long to help boost those bass from 10 to 14 up to 15 to 18 inches long. And then their food habits switch. They start to eat bigger food items, bigger bluegill, bigger shad, bigger, gizzard shad, golden shiners, bigger whatever's in that lake. So the conversation centered around develop the right kind of habitat. And he says, now, in this watershed, I know there's crappie. So I said, then let's design some crappie habitat. We were sitting up on this bluff looking down on the basin of the lake. And I said, you see those plum trees down there? He said, yes. So don't take those out because they're going to be on the bottom of the lake, sticking up maybe 8 or 10 feet into the water column. That'll be a great place to attract crappie in the summertime. And if you get crappie and you want to try to catch some in the summertime, that's where you can go. And you got 4 or 5 places down in the creek of this lake site. Leave that kind of stuff there. So you can, and then you need to mark it. You need to mark it with GPS. You need to mark it with buoys or something so you can find it when you're fishing. So the bottom line is that habitat that he's designing is going to be a key component of the success of that fishery, because every fishery by about year 5, 6, 7, 8 evolves into what the offering is from the happy water and the habitat and the food chain and genetics. And then the 5th key to managing a fishery is a harvest plan. So if you've got all those things and they're all working in harmony, you can have a really, really good fishing lake. Let's see here now. I'm going to back up here. Looks like Dustin's going to promote himself a little bit, which that's fine with me for now. Oh, holy cow, I'm getting behind. Let's see what's going on here. Dave Weber, nugget from the last issue of the magazine. I now know the difference between a pond or a lake. Well, you know what? You might have to explain that to everybody else. That's good. Aaron Gilbert, what's better to stock for bass and crappie, gizzard shad or threadfin shad? Any drawbacks to either? My ponds are located 40 miles northeast of Childress, just inside Oklahoma. There's drawbacks to both. The thing about gizzard shad is they have a tendency to grow huge. And I'll say a tendency. If they survive for 3 years, they're going to weigh 2 pounds apiece. A 2-pound gizzard shad is too big for anything to eat other than a 6 or 7 pound bass or bigger. So you got to be sure you've got big enough bass to be able to control the gizzard shad enough to keep from getting too many big shad. If you get too many big shad, they give off a pheromone that triggers the rest of the fish as well as their species to slow down on their reproduction. So you don't want that. So the upside to gizzard shad is they're a great meal for a trophy bass. They're for a crappie, totally irrelevant. Now, folks that watch this show for many years or many days or hours or something, they know I'm not a great big fan of crappie in small waters. I'm a little less resistant. I've got an article coming out in the next issue of Pond Boss, in the March-April issue, that explains that stance. And I'm a little bit less resistant because, if you got a 3-acre pond and you stock crappie and you get 5 years down the road it's not working, you can change it pretty easy. You take a 30 or 40-acre lake and the crappie don't work in that, it's like trying to stop a train and turn it around. Where you got a 3-acre pond, it's more like throwing the brakes on an F-250 or a Chevy pickup and turning it around. You can do that, So, hey, Kim Moore, good to see you. The threadfin shad northeast of Childress, just inside Oklahoma, up north of Vernon or wherever you are, north of Quanah, odds are going to be high if your water's fairly shallow that you're going to have to restock threadfin shad from time to time, just simply because the water's going to get too cold. Now, if you've got the budget and you don't mind spending some dollars every other year, every third year, every year on threadfins, they're really a good asset because they fill a niche that's different than the other bait fish that you're going to have, such as bluegill and shellcrackers and things. All right, let's see here. I'm going to talk more about that conversation in a minute because it was pretty intriguing. Let's see here. Jamie Clayton says, I've heard you mention that when you're actually liming the ground underneath. But then you mentioned that you really can't do that at Richmond Mill Lake. I understand the water flow. But if the ground underneath is limed, I would think you could still increase pH and alkalinity some, especially so far from the bank. Thoughts? Okay, let me tell you my thoughts about that. That is a function of volume and dissolving. So when you put the lime in the water, look at the water like you look at a sponge. Just look at the parallel. Look at the water as a sponge. It's going to absorb as much. Like you see those commercials about Bounty paper towels, the bigger picker-upper? Water is the bigger picker-upper. So when you put X amount of lime, ag lime, into an acid pond, that lime is going to dissolve pretty quick. And as it does, and it's flowing like a Richmond Mill Lake, it's going to flow out. So it's like, I mean, you got indigestion. How many Tums do you need? You know, how many antacids do you need to get rid of the acid? And then when you eat it, in theory, you eat your Tums or Rolaids or whatever, and then you got enough Rolaids or Tums to last for a month. Well, you don't, because it's going to do its work. It's going to absorb the acid. It's going to change things, and then it's going to go away. Well, lime in moving water like Richmond Mill Lake is doing the same thing. When you put it in the bottom, you can hang it in a bag from a boat. It's still going to do the same thing. When it hits the bottom, it doesn't stay there. It's going to dissolve, and that water is going to absorb that mineral because it needs it, and as it absorbs that mineral, and the water's flowing, it's going to send it on down over the spillway and head down toward the Cape Fear River, and then go to Wilmington, and nobody's ever going to know it was there. So the thing about liming in ponds that are static or not moving, it works better because that lime can absorb and stay in the water and not be flushed downstream, and that's the difference. All right, let's see what else we got, and then I'll get back into that commercial. That conversation a little bit. Drew Schmidt, rewatching the old episode of Tricks to Growing Huge Bluegill Outside of a Fish Feeder. What other tips do you have to help diversify the food chain for bluegill? Would a solar light on a dock help to attract bugs? Yeah, it would. Now, okay, I'm so glad you asked that question, Drew, because here's the thing, is if you understand, and this is where it gets tricky, because I do this for a living, and I'm not sure I always understand it. So how can I expect anybody out there that doesn't do it for a living to totally understand it? Here's where I'm going. In order to grow huge bluegill, you got to make sure they have the right amount of food when they need it at that size. So a 2-inch bluegill, and here's the deal. You're not going to grow huge bluegill if your baby bluegill didn't get to eat when they were young. If they get to eat and not get eaten too quickly, then they're going to be able to get bigger quicker. And a bluegill's typical lifespan, depending on the part of the planet you live, is 6 to 8 years. So you got 6 to 8 years to get that bluegill as big as you can get it. So you got to have the right amount of food. Now, what does that mean? Well, they got a little bitty mouth. Real tiny mouth. They got to eat little bitty pieces of stuff. And they're carnivores. So they like to eat meat. They're not going to make a living eating vegetables because they're carnivorous. They like bugs. They like tiny fish. They like insects. They like worms in the bottom. They'll pick stuff off of plants. So feeding them really expedites the process, and it buffers the pond's natural ability. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. If you don't want to feed fish food, then you need to have the right kind of stuff in your water to grow enough bugs to feed the bluegill. Okay, so what that typically means, you got to have fertile water. Means you got to have the right kind of habitat for insects to be able to reproduce and thrive, which means, like at Richmond Mill Lake, for example, even though we fed those fish, they had these floating mats of grass that would pop up in the spring, grow in shallow water, and then they would break loose and float all over the lake. Some of those islands were bigger than a boat, and there were probably 40 or 50 of them at the peak time of the year. I don't know what it's like now because I hadn't been there in a couple, 3 years, but under those islands were attachment points and a food source for just all kinds of bugs and tiny fish. And the bluegill would take advantage of that. So you got to have the right food chain. The second issue with bluegills is you got to manage their reproduction. Bluegill are like little underwater rabbits. They're going to have babies as often as they can. So as long as they're trying to produce eggs or milk, they're not going to grow as fast. So you got to preserve your biggest ones to keep the small ones off the nest, and then you got to be sure that you got something in there that's eating young of the year bluegill, so just a handful of them survive. People, where I've seen the very, very best big bluegills growing naturally without fish food, is overcrowded bass lakes. So where the bass are overcrowded, they're keeping control of the numbers of bluegill that are reproducing and keeping their numbers in check, which the consequence of that is you get some bluegills that can get really, really, really big. So there's my answer to that. A solar light, you bet. That would help. If it attracts bugs, anything a bluegill can eat. If you can feed a bluegill bugs, feed it bugs. You know, if you can feed it worms, feed it worms. You know, if you can feed it little pieces of fish fillet, feed it. But if you want to get your pond to grow it goes right back to those 5 concepts. Happy water, habitat. Stop on habitat. What's the best habitat for insects? They need floating islands. They need riprap. They need places, vegetation where they can grow and feed. You know, they need fertile water because those insects are going to be gleaning their food from the water column. So if you can figure out how to make all that stuff happen, where you can grow more insects, then you're going to grow more bluegill. And then you control their numbers. So, there we go. And Dustin Brown is talking about dredging. So there you go. Check out their website. Going live here pretty quick. There's Danny Mack. Good to see Danny Mack. All right, Ron Ardoin. We saw gizzard, shad last week and big bass. Yes, now that lake we analyzed last week, I didn't talk about that because we did it after we did the show, but we Robbie Mays from American Sport Fish Hatchery, one of our sponsors, came and brought his electrofishing boat. He and Ron and his son Chase climbed out there with the landowner. They were picking up a bunch of fish, and they got some really beautiful, big, chunky, deep-bellied bass. I mean, young bass, great bodies, great shape, with plenty of food to an extent. They had plenty of shad. They didn't have quite enough bluegills. Well, the conclusions we came to was that those bass are undercrowded, growing at a fast rate, and there should be more bass in there, but there's not. And there should be more bluegill in there, but there's not. Now, there's alligators in that lake, and there was a big raft of cormorants in that lake. The lake is also loaded up with common carp, German carp, that are 3 to 5 pounds apiece. So we're working on a strategy, a management plan for that landowner, for that lake, to figure out how you can have more bass, better catch rates, and a better food chain, and what to do about those carp. The water's turbid, probably because of the carp. It's an old catfish farm where they consolidated a bunch of catfish ponds and made it a big lake, like 85 acres, something like that. So we're going to be working on that. There's Chico promoting the Pond Boss Institute of Higher Pondology. There we go. There you go, Chico. It's time for commercials. Hey, say thanks to Purina Mills. I love those guys. I was talking to David Nelson earlier this week, Scott Hohensee last week. Purina's just funded a research program at Texas A&M University's experimental fish farm. They want to do some comparative tests on their fish food to see what they can do to make it even better than it is now. So I'm always aboard with the research, and I love the fact that they're doing some empirical research with the university, and especially Texas A&M, because they got the tools, and they got Dr. Delbert Gatlin, who is the godfather of fish nutrition around the nation. He's done all kinds of nutrition research on fish and helped develop some good fish foods for some of the companies around the world, and Purina Mills is one of them. And they got good products. Brian Lee Barker wants to feed corn. No, you might as well feed them donuts. I say that a little bit tongue in cheek. I would not feed them corn because it's all carbs, and the fish that would eat it are typically either omnivores or carnivores, and they can't digest it. It would be just like us eating donuts every day, all day long. You know, it'll taste good, we like it, but it's not going to do anything but put fat on a fish. It's not going to help them grow much. Thanks to Texas Hunter Feeders. They're a big sponsor. We got to pop in and talk to Texas Hunter Feeders a couple weeks ago and see how they're doing. I love those guys. Customer service, products, they're great. David Staterman, Easy Docks of Texas, another sponsor of this show. I appreciate you guys a lot. Don't feed corn. Feed corn to the deer, and even the deer guys say don't feed corn to deer. Well, it's like candy. You know, they'll eat it. It's not expensive. It's an attractant. You know, like now, I tell you where corns can work with some maize or something. So if you put it in a 5-gallon bucket with a little bit of water, add some yeast, don't seal the top, let it ferment, then you can chum with it. But it's really not a good feed. All right, Wyatt wants to know a little bit about fertilizing, time and temp. What if I'm a little late or a little early? I'll hit that. Let me see what else. I'll make sure I'm not missing anything. There's Christopher Aguilar, the Boudin King. He brought some really good Boudin last week in South Louisiana. It was good stuff. Matt Marsden, maybe an entry-level question. Matt Marsden, American fish tree. The big ass eats small bass. The big bluegill eats small bluegill. No, they don't. The thing about bluegill is they're limited to what they can eat by their mouth size. Now, they might eat some tiny bluegill coming off the beds, but as a general rule, baby fish grow so fast, they outgrow the mouth size of a bluegill. Now, little bluegill or big bluegills, they'll eat little bluegills, but they won't eat a lot. They won't control their own numbers. That may be the question. And they'll eat little minnows. But they eat a lot of insects. They eat a lot of tiny fish, but they don't control the fish numbers. I've never seen bluegill control numbers. Holy cow, I'm getting lost here. There's Drew Bachman from South Carolina, John Elmer from Indiana. Can't wait to get you. I can't wait to get my new book. I've been talking to those guys. It should be going to the printer here pretty quick. I mean, we're that close to being ready to send it to the printer. All right, let me see. I see. I messed up here. Oh, there it is. Now it's back. Mark Durham, a little bit angry at Gizzard Shad. I'll tackle that here in just a minute. Okay, let me back up here. Make sure I'm not missing something. Oh, Chico, Mike Garcia. The Institute of Higher Pondology. You know what I do on this show is I dig into some of the depths, but I don't hit it as deep as I can because I don't have enough time. Well, on that Institute of Higher Pondology, you're going to pay for it, but I promise you this. It will save you money by not paying so much dumb tax. And we designed that Institute of Higher Pondology. I think there's like 26 videos in it now. We keep adding videos. Chico and I are getting ready to go do a little road trip to wrap up a lake construction video that's going to be top notch. And we got money involved in it, so we're going to get money out of it, but you're going to get value for it. And I promise you that. If you're going to build a lake, you're going to need these things. So what we've tried to do with the Institute of Higher Pondology is create premium content that you can't find on the internet. You know, you can dig way, way back into anything Al Gore's done when he invented the internet, and you ain't going to find the stuff, this real world, boots on the ground, decades of experience stuff like we're putting in this Institute of Higher Pondology. You know, I'm not real good at selling myself, but I'm going to tell you I have a lot of confidence in that Institute stuff. Yep, Chuck Brinkman from Chuck sent me some pictures of his daughter fishing today in the snow in a pond that hadn't frozen and shut yet, and she caught a bluegill. Who knew? Is there a difference in the nutritional value of threadfin versus gizzard shad? Yeah, there is. There is. That's a great question. There's a little nutritional difference. Gizzard shad have a tendency to be oilier. I guess that's the word. There's a lot more oil in gizzard shad. You know, and I don't know if they're omega-3s, 5s, 14s, 6s, or whatever, but I know when you handle gizzard shad and you cut them up, you're going to have oil all over you, and there's fat inside them. So that brings some nutritional value and minerals and metals and oils and vitamins that threadfin shad don't have the same amount. Now, threadfin shad, probably a little bit higher in protein content. Now, you guys can go dig back in the science papers and prove me wrong, but I'm going to tell you what I've seen, not what I've researched on this. I'm speaking from experience anecdotally. I've never dug into that question to see it, but I know this. I've handled a boatload of threadfin shad and boatloads of gizzard shad. Gizzard shad are oilier than threadfins, which I think that's a slight nutritional advantage over the threadfins, except I would believe since the gizzards have more oil, then the threadfins would have more protein, just proportionately. Good stuff. Dustin Brown, I'm glad you're hanging in there, buddy. This is going to be a good vehicle for you. Okay, all right, Wyatt. I see Michael Eric. I see your question. Jamie Clay, I see yours. I see I handled Matt's already. Mark Durham. Okay, I'm getting behind. I better catch up. I see Sean Peters has got something. Danny Max Love reminded him I guess she didn't want to play with you tonight. She wanted you to watch the show. And you better hunker down, man. You're going to get some ice over there in San Antonio. Okay, Danny Mac, Threadfin Shad, my 10th acre pond, temporary feeding frenzy. You know, in your pond, Danny Mac, that could very well be. I know that with your water filtration system and your pumping system, that would be pretty conducive to Threadfin Shad. The biggest question is, can they reproduce faster than they get eaten? That's going to be the question, and I don't know the answer to that. That's kind of a function of the dynamics of the population of fish. You know, odds are high that they would get eaten out, but I don't know. That wouldn't keep me from playing with it. I'd try it and just see what happens. Okay, Wyatt wants to know about fertilizing time and temp. Well, what if I'm a little late or a little early? If you're a little bit early, then it doesn't work. So here, and if you're too late, then you're fertilizing plants. So, you know, the biggest factor in almost every pond management task is temperature related. Almost every one of them. So when the water temperature hits 55, 58 degrees on its way up, and you're confident that it's on its way up, that's the time to fertilize a pond in the south. Now, I wouldn't do it in the north without talking to somebody that knows about your latitude, your dirt, your water. Don't fertilize north of the Mason-Dixon line. Don't fertilize in corn country. You know, talk to somebody like where Michael Ehrig is. He's in Iowa. You know, there's acres and acres of agricultural land through there. You want to be picky about how you treat that. So on fertilizing, you follow the directions, and some of that's going to be contingent on the visibility of the water, because as the water begins to warm up, any natural fertility is going to kick in, and the plankton bloom is going to start to form, you know, with that, as that water temperature is rising. And if you need to give it a nudge with fertilizer, give it a nudge. But timing is a big deal. If you do it too early, it just doesn't work, because the plankton is not going to start growing until, you know, 55, 56, 57, 58, 60, 62, 63. So if you fertilize at 44, you see nothing. And then once the water temperature rises, that's when you start to see a bloom kick in. So if you do it too late, by that time you're fertilizing plants. And when you're fertilizing plants, they're going to take up the fertilizer more than the plankton are going to take up the fertilizer. And then you got plant problems. So timing is a big deal, but temperature is the backbone of those decisions. Michael Ehrig, my local 6-acre pond, was built in the 80s. Has bluegill, black crappie, largemouth bass still from the originally stocked fish. Last few years, he stocked 250 channel cat, 1,000 red ear, 355 to 7-inch walleye. Would it make or break anything if I introduce a few hundred hybrid sunfish? Oh, I've been supplemental feeding. Gills are thick as heck now, unlike they used to be. I'm going to tell you, it wouldn't make any difference if you wanted to add a few hundred hybrid sunfish. They're not gonna add much to the fishery other than a fish that you can grow fast and catch and enjoy. They don't reproduce enough. You know, I mean, being a hybrid, you'd think that they don't reproduce at all. That's not true. They do reproduce. It's the fact of the matter is, hybrid sunfish, about 95% of them are males. And then they typically tend to not reproduce with their own kind. So they can reproduce with bluegills, but it's not going to be a significant number there. So there's absolutely no harm to adding a few hybrid sunfish. That's where I'm going. Jamie Clayton, you have mentioned at certain times of the year to only run aeration for 12 hours to help with water temperature. But you've also mentioned under-aerating a pond is not great and possibly harmful. So if your aeration system is built for your pond size, you want to be under-aerating when you only use it for 12 hours? That's a great question. No, because what the aeration system is, the bottom of fused aeration systems' primary function is to break up the thermocline and allow water that sits below the thermocline to communicate with the atmosphere with vertical movement. So that aeration system isn't really adding oxygen, it's just keeping the water autonomous top to bottom. So when you're aerating 12 hours a day, you're moving that water 12 hours a day, letting it relieve itself of its gases and absorb oxygen and whatever else that it needs, you know, to give and take. And while you're doing that, if that other 12 hours, it isn't enough time for it to form a thermocline and allow that water below the thermocline to get static and then become anoxic. So if you don't aerate, like I've got a client that called me, he wanted to know if he he wanted to know if he said, should I put my aeration system on a timer? I said, what's your temperature? He said, it's about 88 degrees. I said, yeah, you need to put it on a timer. You only need to aerate, from 9 at night till 9 in the morning. So he called me 3 days later and his fish were dying. So I said, there's got to be something wrong. Tell me what's going on. Have you been aerating 24/7? He says, oh, no. He said, I was having to use a generator until they got the power down there. And my generator went out of service. It broke. And for 10 days, I didn't aerate at all. Well, the lake had stratified. So he had anoxic water. And when he kicked that aeration system on for 12 hours a day, he forced that anoxic water, that toxic anoxic water, up to the top and caused some fish to die. Had I known that, if he'd have told me that little important fact, I'd have said, treat it just like a startup. 15 minutes a day, 30 tomorrow, 1 hour the next day, double it every day until you're up going 24/7. You've eliminated the thermocline. Then once the thermocline's gone, then kick it into that 12-hour-a-day shift in the heat of the summer. There's my thoughts on that. Mark Durham, Gizzard Shad suck. They've gotten out of control at our lake. We tried using hybrid strappers years ago, but they didn't stick with them. They worked great, grew huge, but the powers that be cried, thinking strappers ate all the crappie and took them out, ignoring the biologist recommendations. Really screwed some awesome sport fishing. Sadly, the meat hogs won. Now they all miss the big strapper fishing and that fun. Okay, I can't debate any of that other than Gizzard Shad do suck because that's the way they eat. They suck the mud off the bottom. Oh, you kind of set me up for that one. But here's my point. I don't ever blame a fish for doing what that fish does. That's what Gizzard Shad do. They feed on the bottom. And if you don't have the right management strategy and the right dynamics of that fishery, then they're going to overpopulate, and then you got to deal with it. That's the problem. It's not the fish. The fish are doing what fish do. I hear people bad-mouthing grass carp. Grass carp do what grass carp do. Bass do what bass do. Hybrid strappers do what hybrid strappers do. And if you provide the happy water and the best habitat for those species and the right food chain, everything's going to click. Now if you've got a big silted-in lake that was built in 1904, a lot of two-foot deep water, threadfin shad are going to just flourish in that. And there's not going to be a snowball's chance that bass can keep their numbers down because you've got everything gizzard shad need to suck the mud and get their food. So when you've got an advantage in the habitat for that species, that's what's going to thrive. And that was part of the conversation I was having with this landowner yesterday morning and early afternoon. I went there, I was going to spend an hour, and we got into the second hour, which carried over into a third hour, but it was a fun conversation. I'll hit some more of that here in a minute because you guys are going to like some of this conversation. So, Mark Durham, I hear what you're saying, buddy. I get it. Christopher Aguilar got his pond boss today. Groundhog Day. Let's see. 23, that's 8 plus 31, 39, 40. 41 days. 41 days for the post office to do their job. And they raise their prices. Ken Dowd from Pennsylvania. I bet you're hunkered down tonight. Sean Peters, have a 1 acre lake. How many hybrid striped bass would it take to keep the bluegill in check? 30 or 40. The good news about the hybrid striper now, will take them a while. They're not going to do it quick. Because when you buy them, they might be 5 or 6 inches long. Let's see something on my phone I need to get rid of. They can do it. It's just going to take them a little while to do it. Look at that, Ron Ardoin. He's been to one of the live Institute of Higher Pondology, and he's been on the one online, and he's seen it. So there's your little testimony about how good the Institute of Higher Pondology is. Ken Dowd, you got a 2 acre pond that is almost frozen over. Should I keep the aeration system on if it completely freezes? No, shut it down. Shut it down till spring. You've done everything you need to do. Leave it. Turn it off, because what that will do is your aeration system, especially if your diffuser's in the deepest part of the pond, it's going to keep shoving that water up, let it hit the surface air. It's going to cool it way, way, way down. Whereas if you stop it, the water's going to stratify minimally, but the bottom water is going to be more dense at 39 or 40 degrees, so your fish will have another thermal refuge. In this case, it's a warmer refuge, and they really need that. Fish don't like it at 32.1 degrees. They don't like it. Mark Dyer, do game fish travel throughout a fishery? A 25-acre lake, horseshoe-shaped? Sound like an oxbow lake to me. That's a great question. Let me see here. Let me kind of tap into it. Do game fish travel throughout a fishery, or do they stay in one relative area through their adult life? I ask based off a harvest location. If you regularly harvest in primarily one area over time, like a few years, will the catch rate continue to drop in that area, or will fish continue to refill that area, replacing ones that are harvested or culled? Okay, that's kind of a two-part question, so I'm going to take it like this. Game fish, it's really interesting, because like when you go buy some of these high-powered, great genetic fish, and you stock them, they all have different personalities. They all have different propensity. They all have different plasticity, and the ones that can thrive in your environment will. Some of them are going to be long-distance runners. Some of them are going to be couch potatoes. And some of that's going to, the proportion of those fish is going to be based on the kind of habitat that you've got. If you've got the right kind of habitat where fish can be, especially bass can be, or any other game fish for that matter, walleye, smallmouth bass, the same thing. If they can be couch potatoes, they're going to be couch potatoes the majority of their time. If they have to go out and run around a horseshoe-shaped oxbow lake to make a living, then that's the ones that are going to thrive. You know, the other ones are not going to do as well. So the behavior of your fish, in part one of the question, is going to vary among the individuals within that population. We did I got to be involved in a study years ago where we radio tagged about 40 bass in a lake, and the technicians, the PhD student, tracked their movements. He had one bass, and it was a 125-acre lake. He had one bass that he tagged, radio tagged, that never left an area bigger than a football field. He had another one that was about 7 pounds that moved 2 miles a day every single day, and it never ran the same route. And it might go over here half a mile and sit for 4 hours, and then go another 3/4 of a mile and sit for 4 hours, and then move over here. But it wasn't running a trap line. It wasn't checking out where it could eat. It was just moving, because that's what it did. So the second part of your question, if you regularly harvest in primarily one area over time, if you harvest now, one thing, here's part of the conversation I had with a guy yesterday, and I'm gonna answer that. I'm gonna answer that second part of the question, but I'm gonna circle around to it. So he was saying, I want to grow some trophy bass, so I'm thinking I need to stock 50 bass per acre in order to have a few enough bass in there on that food chain so they grow really, really, really fast. So I said, you know, back, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago, Jeff Slipke, fisheries biologist, gave a presentation at a Pond Boss conference in Missouri, and he was telling, you know, by the year 3, we're having to harvest bass, so I thought we'd try a few experiments. We had some customers willing to do it, where they doubled the stocking rates of bluegills to increase the food chain. So instead of stocking 1,000 bluegill fingerlings per acre, they stocked 2,000 per acre. Stocked the bass at the normal rates. And it actually bought them one more year before they had to start culling fish, but they still had to cull fish. Well, I got to thinking about that, and I thought, well, wait a minute. You know, if the goal is to try to grow some trophy largemouth bass, you typically don't have enough big bass. Boy, you can hear that rain coming down out there now. You don't have enough big bass to keep the numbers of small bass in check. Now, like what Matt Marsden said a while ago, big bass do eat small bass. They do, because they can. Woo! I don't know what that is. So, let's do the math. So if you stock 50 bass per acre, and I asked this landowner, I said, if you stock 50 bass per acre, how many of those are boys and how many are girls? He said, 50-50. So I said, 25 are girls. And I said, what percentage of those girls, even if you get the best genetics you can get, what percentage of those do you think are going to thrive in this lake? He said, oh, I don't know, 25 or 30%. I said, that's right. Which it is, that's right. So what's 25 or 30% of 25? He said, oh, 7 or 8 or 9. I said, so now we're talking about 7 or 8 or 9 fish out of 50 per unit of water that's about as big as a football field. Now visualize that. Is that enough big bass for your catch rates to be good enough? And is it enough big bass to control the numbers of small bass? He said, so 50 is not a good number? I said, I didn't say that. Because in a typical lake, 50 is the recommended rate. And I said, so about 12 or 13 years ago, we took 5 different lakes and we decided to try an experiment. Brand new lakes. One of them was newly renovated and the rest were brand new lakes. We stocked bass at 200 per acre. So now we got 100 of them that are girls. And out of that, 25 or 30 of them, our theory was 25 or 30 of them would really excel, but we'd have to start culling a little sooner to get rid of those males and underperforming fish, generally speaking. Well, after 18 months, we took the electrofishing boat out there, and 4 of the 5 lakes, the theory came true. The 5th one just crapped out, and I still don't know why. And I got to follow that experiment up until the time that I sold the pond management side of my business. But in fact, we saw, good numbers of females growing really, really, really fast. And we could take the electrofishing boat and cull some of those small ones. So he said, you know what? That may be what we need to do here. So I said, but you're going to have to be ready to cull. So now the thing about culling, and this is where I'm going to answer the second part of that question. When you're culling fish, used to, guys like me would say, you know what? You got a lake that's crowded with bass. It's been like that 5 or 6 years. You just need to take out every bass you can that's 14 inches and smaller and get your numbers down so the remaining fish can grow. Well, the reality is as you're culling fish, you're making room for the younger fish to fill the slot. And that's what happens. Now, also keep in mind, when you're culling fish by angling, you're typically catching the most aggressive fish. So that's why in the last 10 or 12 years, I'm recommending to people you be selective. Weigh and measure your fish. It's worth it. You want to protect the best of the best and the most aggressive fish that you've got. So if your slot limit, for example, is 10 to 14 inches, and you catch a 13-inch bass that looks like a sumo wrestler, looks like John Cena, throw it back. Put it back in the water. But if you're catching some that are 75, 80% of what their relative weight should be, those need to come out. So selective harvest is the big deal. And as you're culling fish, really what you're doing is you're not so much thinning the numbers as you are making room for the next generation of fish to come in and fill that slot. So culling is pretty much ongoing, although if you start off with an overcrowded bass lake, you can get the numbers down and then level things off so the growth rates start to go up. And 99 times out of 100, the growth rates are going to go up on the younger fish, not the slot fish that you're leaving behind. That's real important to know. So, there's my answer on that one. And I agree with myself on that answer, by the way. Sometimes I don't always, but I do. Okay, so let me see what else. Holy cow, we got a bunch of stuff here. This is cool. Fred Bingaman still has not gotten his pond boss, which irritates the snot out of me. Leanne put some in the mail to you. Hey, there's Jason Nepstad. Good to see Jason. Okay, holy cow, let me see here. Wyatt, what's considered too late or temperature that's too high? Too late is going to be when the temperature's in the upper 60s, lower 70s, and you can see new growth on aquatic plants. Like in your pond outside of Abilene, if you're seeing bushy pondweed starting to grow, a lot of fresh green growth, you're getting close to being too late. So in that case, technique makes a difference. Where if you're going to fertilize it, you need to fertilize it where you're going to get the fertility of the fertilizer dissolved into the main body of the lake and let the bloom start out there in the deeper part. And so in other words, what I'll do is I'll concentrate the fertilizer in the main body of the lake, get it mixed in well, and then hope that the bloom kicks in, the bloom expands around the whole lake. But if you fertilize it normally, you're going to fertilize that vegetation. So watch when your vegetation is growing. Okay, let me see here. Danny Mack, just saying, it seemed you said that you can see a bloom forming, fertilizing to support. I have said that. So when you see a bloom starting, so you do that by measuring visibility. So before you get ready to fertilize, Wyatt, get your Secchi disc. And if you don't have one, everybody go get a Secchi disc. S-E-C-C-H-I, Secchi disc. Buy one. They're cheap, and it's a great tool. A thermometer and a Secchi disc are two crucial tools. Everybody thinks a fishing pole is crucial. Well, it is. So is a Secchi disc and a thermometer. So you can pay attention to the visibility of the water and the temperature. So when you check the visibility, what you're after is 18 to 24 inches of visibility. If you got visibility of 6 feet, you're going to need more fertilizer than if you got a visibility of 3 feet. You know, and so as you fertilize and that bloom kicks in, you're checking visibility. You're checking it every 4 or 5 days if you can. And then based on the visibility, that's going to be the determining factor along with temperature as to if you fertilize more or less. So Danny Mac's right. Jason says, any signs to look for that you have too many gizzard shad? Yeah, they tend to make a lake turbid. This time of year, actually, Jason, gizzard shad will start flocking to docks, and they'll congregate around a dock. Another sign is that you're not seeing the reproduction of gizzard shad that you have. So you're not seeing babies. You know, now when they begin to congregate around docks looking for structure, they're going to be like-sized fish and be a lot of them. I remember, years and years and years ago, I had a man call me and said, hey man, I got all these shad gathering around my dock, and I don't know what to do about it. So I loaded my 200-foot seine on the trailer, and I hauled it down there and got out in that water, and it was in November that year, I think, and we pulled a seine, and those shad were just collected around his dock. So I got out there in breast-deep water. It was kind of cold, but I was in my 20s, so it didn't matter. And kicked all those shad out from under there, pulled the seine around. We hauled out 1,200 pounds of gizzard shad out of that lake. And the next spring, he saw spawns that he hadn't seen in years. So their density was too high. But the two signs are you're not seeing the reproduction you should see in all species, and those gizzard shad tend to congregate in big schools. Mark Dyer, very excited for next issue's article on artificial. Yeah, that's gonna. I'm working on a really, really big article about artificial structure. That one's going to come out, and I'm way into it. I'm having to do quite a bit of research, which I do that from time to time because it's going to be pretty intense. It's going to be a pretty intense article. That's going to be worth a subscription to the magazine just to read that in there. Matt Marsden's going to want to read it too. All right, let me see here. We're going to run out of time. Holy cow, I just scrolled way too high. Bear with me a minute. I got to get down there where these questions are. My computer's moving slow because my internet's slow. Hang on, don't go away. I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it down here. Okay, let me see here. Danny Mac wants some more hybrid stripers. At least one you catch now is 16 inches. I'm thinking of flooding the pond with forage and stealthy stocking of stripers and some new channel. There's nothing wrong with that at all. You know what? The thing about your pond is it's so small and manageable and recirculating. You can do anything you want to, and you can change it in one day if you want. Mark Durham, my new bubbler has done a great job of opening the water around my docks. Bonus, it has attracted bald eagles. I think they're picking the frozen dead shad from the edges. That is pretty cool. Pretty cool. Christopher Aguilar, raffle ticket, $10 a ticket. Bomb Moss comes out to your pond. Yep, $10 a ticket. Yep, raffle me off. My wife would like that. She doesn't think I'm gone enough as it is, and I've been gone. After I left you guys, I went to Denver for a short period of time. Okay, so you know what? I'm going to start wrapping it up. By the way, be sure, subscribe to Pond Boss. If you haven't done it, here it is. You know, I haven't been by the office to get the latest issue because it was shipped late to us too, but I've got it, haven't seen it, can't wait to see it. So I do appreciate everybody joining me on these Wednesday nights. It kind of helps me keep my brain rocking and rolling as well, and I love your questions. I love to interact. And before long, I'll be working on some topical podcasts, kind of like Joe Rogan does without the long format and the potty mouth, and maybe not as much potty mouth. But I'm working on several other things. So, and by the way, other resources, you go to pondboss.com, free articles, free videos. There's links to every one of these videos that I've done. This is the 4th year of doing these videos. You know, Debbie tried to get me to do it 5 or 6 years ago, and finally I said, leave me alone. You know, if you go build me a set, I'll do it. I'll be damned. She built me a set, so I had to do it. and it's never been more fun. I'm enjoying it now as much as I ever have. Colin Owens, I have questions on a series of ponds in Utah. I'm dealing with aquatic plants during the summer months, and I'd value your expertise or recommendation on someone to help managing a western high-altitude pond. Yes, I've got folks that are in Montana that work in Utah. As a matter of fact, I think they're listed in the resource guide. But if you'll send me an email, I will send you the contact information for, it's irritating, I can't think about who it is, but Terry Smith is her name, and her husband is in the pond building and managing business as well. So, here we go. Danny Mack, if he wins the raffle, he'd line up Clifton Jansky for the entertainment. That's pretty cute. All right, so hey, 7:30, I'm glad you guys joined in. I appreciate the time you spend with me every Wednesday. So if you have any questions, post them up. Go to pondboss.com, check out the forum there and our Facebook page. We add stuff. I'm not in Instagram and Twitter as much, but I will be sooner rather than later. So I'm glad you guys checked in, and I will see you next Wednesday. Actually, I'm going to be here at the RV next Wednesday. So I'll see you guys next Wednesday. Thanks for checking in. Adios.